Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to start out on the occupational tax receipt end of the budget. Brad's going to go get the caster so that we can cast this up on the main TV. Okay. 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 So we're good. We had for those that are viewing now on Facebook Live, we had started, but we realized we were not live. So I'm going to kind of go back over what I just said. We're starting out on this budget workshop with the receipts end of the budget, specifically the occupational tax receipts, because we subsidize so much. I think 4 accounts. We went back. The only thing comparable that we could come up with pandemic was 2008. Going into next fiscal year, we really don't know how this pandemic is going to affect our budget and all the rapid changes that's happening currently. So the 2008 year, we went back and looked. The fiscal court then reduced the receipts. We thought that that was a smart thing for us to do going forward in the next year's budget. So we reduced the occupational tax receipts from 5.1 to 4.2 million. It created about a $900,000 shortfall that we had to adjust in the budget. The best way we did that was to put a percentage to each account that we subsidize. Obviously, the largest being the general fund to the smallest being 911, 55% to the general fund, 30% to the road department, 10% to the jail, about 8% to 911. So that was the basis of this budget that you're looking at. As we moved forward, we sat down with all the department heads and elected officials that are affected by the subsidy, and we managed to meet or get to that roughly $900,000 shortfall. But it didn't, as you'll see in the budget as we go through this, it didn't cover the retirement increase. And we're going to confirm, I know Eddie and I had talked about this when we met. We're going to try to get the official information if the General Assembly actually did freeze that percentage. If it did, then that's good. Right now, it's about $253,000 if it goes off of the third 12% increase. If they froze it, I think it reduced it to about $125,000 if I remember correctly. But the increase with health insurance and salary increases, that total was about $440,000, and then the bond debt service about $465,000. So you'll see that we still have monies under that initial OTA reduction, the 4.2 million. We still have about a little over $800,000 that we have to adjust in the budget. So we're going to go through the receipts and if anybody has any questions, this today is just to get this out to you guys so that you can see it. Obviously, we'll jump ahead. May 1st, we have to have a balanced first reading budget submitted to DLG. So we'll plan to have a meeting to do a first reading before May 1st, and we'll probably look around the end of April. We've got a fiscal court meeting on April 21st. We'll have a special call meeting just to do because we've got a lot going on and trying to get everybody to the table during the COVID and everything else. So I'm just kind of giving you a reverse planning from May 1st. We can continue discussing the budget all the way into June. So don't if you remember, don't worry if we submit this to May 1st. It all has to be done by May 1st. but I'm just giving you a timeline for right now for the first reading. We're going to shoot for that deadline to DLG May 1st. We'll probably have a meeting April 31st if we have to, maybe before then, but April 31st we'll have a meeting to do the first reading so we can submit that. We'll have another budget workshop in between now and then. Obviously, we're still waiting to hear back from the jailer and the sheriff. We will have another budget workshop to where if we want to have an individual department head come in, we can. I know my staff, we sat down with all the department heads, and April 20th is a key date. We went back and looked at the historical data on the OTA. That fourth quarter that we're calling was about $1.4 million in that fourth quarter this time last year. And so April 20th is the deadline for those receipts for this fiscal year. So we've got two things here. We got the current fiscal year that we're going to be looking at that may help us understand what has already been happening with a gradual decline with the OTA receipts. I think going back 3 or 4 years historically, going from like 6 million, 5.9, 5.8 last year, 5.7. So we'll get an idea how that's gradually decreasing, not including how the COVID is going to affect us going into next year. So we've got a juggling act here that we have to look at. But April 20th is the deadline. We have fiscal court April 21st. So we may be able to, we will try to be able to give you a target number by the 21st fiscal court meeting. We're already going to be meeting on the 21st. It may be something that we look at setting up another budget workshop on the 21st, if you think we can do that. And we'll push that out to you as another time for us to meet. But April 20th this year. I know we're looking forward to it because we'll have better answers for you as far as the receipts that are coming in on the OTA. So if you want, we'll go ahead and we'll start going through these receipts. This is my presentation to you. It's not balanced yet because there's still a lot of monies that we have to shift and adjust. But I think it's important that we go ahead and meet, give it to you. You guys can go and review it. The next meeting when we come back, if you have anything in between to discuss, please reach out to us because this is it's a first for all the counties and the cities across this state and this country. How is this going to affect us moving into the next fiscal year, and how are we going to budget? I feel when my staff sat down to prepare this budget, we in mind felt that the best way to prepare next year's budget is to prepare it so that if the worst happens, we can soften the blow to our budget. And if the best thing that happens, the economy comes back, we don't have the projected shortfalls that we're seeing, then this time next year we'll be in a better position to benefit from that. But we're going to be very conservative on the front end, expect the worst so that we don't put our employees in a compromising situation and putting our services in a compromising situation. So with that, I'll shut up, and Erica, if you just want to go through the receipts. If you guys have any questions, just
Just real quick, if I could ask, I know you had mentioned using 2008 numbers. Has the was thinking, okay, what's the last worst economic issue we've had, or did the state give any guidance to that?
And that's a fair question. The state, I personally would, I understand trying to get as much information as we can to make decisions towards the budget, but seeing how the state has got their own financial problems, I would rather us look at historical data locally in our own budget and how our budget has favored, like the 2008 crisis. I don't know if the state, they can give us how it's going to affect, like the PVA office, Tony just sent out an email where they're going to be potentially pushing back tax deadlines. The OTA that we just discussed, where the businesses can file all the way up to July of next year, meaning, we'll get our monies, but it'll be going into the next fiscal year. So that's potentially could affect us this fiscal year. But to rely on the state money, I don't know if they can give us anything that would help us make a better decision. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that we have is that historical data locally. I mean, and we're just talking about the OTA. Now, they may be able to give some projections with property taxes, things like that, but the occupational tax subsidizes so much of our accounts. That's what we focused on. With the subsidies that we have, and I don't know what the total number is, we were subsidizing about 5.1. That's what we budgeted this fiscal year. I think last year was 5.7. So to answer your question, there's some changes that are being made even as we speak that are going to affect our budgets, and it's going to be anything that we can get obviously would help us, but our historical data on the numbers that we get, that's that's like I ran into Tim this morning because of the COVID. They're in discussions right now with the primary, and the primary, they may not be. This is just discussions. This hasn't been a decision, but we have to think of things like this. So the primary, which would affect this fiscal year, but not having people go to the polls, but actually mail in their ballots. Well, we budget for poll workers. The issue is, if we go to mail-ins, we don't really know what the cost would be for postage, and I think we budgeted about $46,000 for poll workers in the budget. Postage may be more than that. So it's those little bitty things that all they can do is just, if something like that happens, is say, hey, look, this is where a change is being made at the state level, like the retirement percentage. If it's frozen, that portion will be last year's percentages or the current year percentages. It dropped it from 253,000 to say 125,000. We've got that information. So some of that information would help. We can plug that in, but the biggest bulk to our budget is going to be the occupational tax because we subsidize so much. Does that help? Okay. Do you just want to go down through the receipts?
Yeah, I can. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Can you guys hear us?
I can. I can hear, that's Erica, she's echoing.
Okay.
Okay, am I still echoing to you, or can you hear me better?
Since you're casting your desktop, I'll just stick it right by you.
Did we?
There's no action items or no reason you all be,
Yeah. I've already gone through it, and it's been emailed, right? Or they have it in their,
While they're getting Erica situated, I just wanted to go on record to say we just received this earlier and had not had a chance to review it. I realize it's not balanced, so if I don't have any questions, that's the reason.
Yeah, Kevin, just so that the people understand too, this is me presenting you my budget. So this is not an action item. You'll get it, and then, just like I said, you go back and you review it. You can communicate to my office or the treasurer's office, but this is where I sit down with the commissioners and present my budget. So this is not an action item, okay? It doesn't matter if you got it today or a week ago. This is me presenting the budget to you. All
Well,
right.
it kind of matters to me. I would have liked to have a few minutes to look at it, but that's beside the point. We can move on.
No, because I'm gonna correct you right now. I am presenting my budget to you. There's no action item. I'm giving you the full details of how me and my staff put this budget together. This is me presenting it to you and there's two other commissioners. There's no voting requirement today. You're gonna have plenty of time to review this budget. We're gonna go through each line. That's the way we've been doing this. I present it to you, okay?
I understand it's not an action item. I don't know
Okay.
what's going on.
Erica, if you'll go ahead and
Anybody watching?
proceed.
I haven't seen this, so points made, we can move on or not.
Go ahead and go through the receipts, please.
Okay, so as we go through these, of course, they're not, can you hear me okay now that you're closer to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Agree, Greg.
Okay, so this is not balanced. This budget is not balanced. It's very rough at this point. So as we kind of look through the receipts, you'll notice in column J, that's budgeted for this coming up year that we're talking about. And how we started this is we used the budgeted numbers from last year kind of just as a backbone, and then started picking through them for things that we knew were going to change. So you can kind of see a difference column here on the far right between last year's budget and this year's budget. Be cautious to let this, when you're kind of looking at the difference, because you'll notice that column H, fiscal year 1920, has its amendments in there as well, any amendments we did throughout the year. And so when we started back at the backbone of the budget, we did not include amendments. So kind of just doing a quick bypass, because I think that probably the expenditure side of the budget is going to be something we want to discuss more than this receipt side up at the front. So I'll kind of go through the receipts quickly. You'll notice at kind of as you scroll down through this first section in the general fund, that we didn't make a lot of changes to property taxes, tangible tax, motor vehicle tax, all of that. We left those numbers around what they were last year. And looking at the actual 19 receipts and where we're at as of 3/31, that's in column I, we determined whether or not we wanted to leave them at those amounts. So the first difference really you see as you scroll through here is the PACRO grant, and that's an in and out grant. So whatever this is budgeted as a receipt, it's also going to be budgeted as an expense. It is different because last year there was an amendment because there was more than one grant or whatever. I can't remember the case that happened in this fiscal year. But so to say that this is a decrease in budget by 45, it's not really accurate. It's more just a mathematical formula showing the difference there. Really, we just set it back to what it was budgeted before there were any amendments. And you'll see that happen a lot. I've tried to indicate with an orange highlight in the budgeted with in 1920 column of the numbers that did have amendments, and that way it helps draw your attention more to them so that we can look at them closer. If you have a question, we'll know that there was an amendment in there. So going on through the general fund, the next difference we hit is the court rental fee. Of course, that's the same situation. There was an amendment in that this year, so we took it back to the unamended amount. So even though there says there's a difference, there's not a huge difference there. We didn't cut that receipt. This GIS fees, this is the first one that actually was a change. We decreased that after speaking with Andy and looking at what's going to be billed out this year to reflect a more accurate number. So it decreased by $6,000. Surplus equipment, in the past it was zero, it just had amendments. Insurance proceeds, in the past it was zero, it just had amendments. This is actually payroll reimbursements. It was brought down to zero, and then when we had our meeting with the PBA, part of he didn't have a lot of room to cut in his budget for the cuts that we want to make for the decrease to OTA, but he was able to find room in his budget outside of the budget the PBA has that's separate from the fiscal court to reimburse us some for an employee. So that's new. That's a new receipt this year. And then no change to anything else really, other than the miscellaneous went back to what it was before any amendments. So that's kind of the general fund. Even though it says that there's a big decrease there in receipts, that's just from the amendments. So we kind of talked about that. We need to kind of skip this portion that talks about what the beginning balance is and what the transfer in from occupational tax is going to be. Those are not updated figures because the budget is not balanced. So as we get to the point where we've cut everything we have to cut or have the expenditures correctly, then we'll know better what we're going to have to subsidize the general fund with occupational tax. And we also need to do a rough estimate of what we think the ending balance of this year is going to be so that we know what the beginning balance of next year is going to be. And that's kind of going to be a difficult, keep that in mind as we're talking too. In the past, you can kind of look just at the general fund. The budget has relied on having money left over from the previous year as a beginning balance for the next year. So we've relied on that money to start us out with covering our expenditures. And with the occupational tax changing or potential changes, we don't know what that's going to be. So we have advised most of the department heads as they came in and met with us to try to limit spending for the rest of the fiscal year to the necessities. I know that sometimes people can get to the end of the year and say, oh, we've got some money left over in our whatever, we need a new whatever. It's more of a want than a need, but the money was there. So we've kind of asked them to be more cautious with their spending towards the end of the year. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to cast my computer screen so that it's visible up here. Oh, okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so we'll go on into the road fund here. There were some changes that were made in the state funded projects receipts, and that is because we have taken out at this time any discretionary funds. So we'll, of course, this is evolving. It'll be more finalized as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year and we know what's going to come in. So we'll keep that updated. And there really weren't much changes other than that, even though, of course, again, this shows there's decreases here to receipts, but really it was just going back to the budgeted amount last year without any amendments. So the receipts for the road fund, they were not greatly changed except for that discretionary money. And of course, in the past, that was budgeted both in and out specifically for those monies that were, the discretionary funds were for. Again, same deal with the beginning balance and the transfers. Those are not balanced. They'll have to change as we get closer and know what the ending expenditures are, and so that we can calculate the receipts we need. The jail fund had a few changes. Speaking with Roger, he had a few places he felt comfortable increasing his receipted budget just a smidge based on whatever he's had a couple of changes to some fees. And then there were a few areas where he wanted to decrease a little bit out of caution. So overall, he had a little bit of an increase to his operating receipts here of about $2,500. Same deal with his beginning balance and the transfers in of occupational tax that we'll need. We won't know that until we finished our expenditure side. The grant fund is next here. We have that budgeted at 0. That will, of course, change if we end up entering into anything that needs to go into that grant fund for the next fiscal year. Down to 911. So the first line here is the 911 fees. That's the landline fees. And so we kind of looked at the previous year's trend and noticed kind of where we're at, and just the general trend in general of landlines going down. We conservatively decreased that. The grant we took out. We can, if 911 does get approved for any of the grants that they've applied for, of course, we'll do a budget amendment and we'll amend both the receipt of that and the expenditure of that grant. But for now, we've put both the receipt and expenditure of any grants as 0 until we know further. We kept the wireless 911 fees the same, although that could potentially change as well. We might know that more as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year. And then from about here down with the new balance of the fiscal year and the transfers in, that's the same as we've already discussed. It's changing. So here's what Judge talked about at the very beginning of the meeting, where in the past we have, so this fiscal year we budgeted in $5.1 million of occupational tax receipts. To be conservative, 4.2 is what we're sitting at right now. You'll see that on the transfer outside for this budgeted fiscal year that we were in, it was 4.861. So not all of the money that we budget to receive is budgeted to divvy between the funds, and that's because we keep a little reserve for refunds. Often times that happens, and you'll see that on the expenditure side. So when we decided, which Judge touched on this earlier, when we kind of started thinking about how we were going to decide how to spread that decrease that we have there of $900,000, what I did was I looked at this year, and I looked at the four funds that we subsidize with occupational tax. The total of the 4 funds is about 4.861. And I found the amounts that each fund received in their budget in that year, and just did a simple percentage. So the general fund gets about 55.5% of that 4.8. The road fund gets about 30%. The jail gets about 9 or 10%, and 911 gets about 8%. So that's how I divvied up the decrease. 55% of it to the general fund, and so forth. So you'll see that we're trying to reach that goal as we talk about the expenditures. The Animal Shelter Donation Fund, you guys remember just a few court meetings ago, we brought this into our financials in order to satisfy audit findings. This is not up to date at the moment. I think that they have a balance in that account right now, about $25,000. So I'll update that information for them. But it is, obviously, it's not subsidized by the occupational tax money. So down to ABC, we did not make any changes on any of the receipts for that fund. Of course, from here down, same deal we've already talked about. We'll need to see those as we look at the expenditures. For the building inspection fund, we changed those receipts a little bit, and that was based on discussions with Casey about what he's seeing happening with the permitting and inspections right now, and he felt it was prudent to decrease these amounts to the ones that we have here. Of course, so any, we've never historically had to subsidize this account. This is something that's going to have to be a discussion, because at this amount that we've receipted in, I don't know that that the budget can carry the way it is right now in the expenditure. So that's something that we're going to have to discuss.
Can I jump in on that? We're going to be, we've got 2 contracts that we're going to have to review, and I believe with talking with Casey, when the county took this on, there is no cost that is put, or no money's brought in from the city governments as well. So we're going to have to discuss this, because there's obviously a decrease and a potential subsidy from somewhere, and this is definitely going to have to be discussed. So we'll bring the contracts to the next court meeting to discuss, and I'll get those sent out to you guys so you can review the current contracts, but we're going to have to start having discussions on these boards that the fees come in, and the county, took this on, and now we've got one of those years where it's a shortfall, and we don't even know what next year's gonna show us. But I think that all those that participate need to be looking at paying a fair share. So, anyways.
Okay, so then we're at the end of the receipt side of this budget. Anything down on this area, it's doing a recap of occupational funds and where they went, occupational tax funds. And of course, this is not up to date because, as I said before, we need to have our expenditures lined out before we know the exact amounts of OTA to each fund. But we did try to roughly cut the percentages that we've already talked about from each fund. Okay, so.
Hey, Erica, just real quick.
Yeah.
The document that you sent that I'm going off of, it stops just under, or at line 150 for some reason. So
Okay.
later, take a look at that, and because then I won't have anything to.
Okay. Yes, I can,
off of
and
past
as,
150. I mean, it could be I don't know. But let me know.
well, I would anticipate that as we're talking today, there's going to be more changes that we make together as we're speaking. So I would need to resend it out anyway to you all with the changes that we make today. So yes, I will be sending it as soon as we're done today. Or once it's balanced, whichever turns out to be better for you all.
Did you send it on from an Excel file?
Yeah, I sent it as an Excel attachment. So it's not updating as I'm updating it.
Right.
Okay, so we can move on to the expenditure side or the appropriation side. When you look at this budget later, when you all are by yourselves, the appropriation budget tab that is yellow, it pulls in all of these tabs that are over to the right-hand side for each of the departments. It pulls it all into one document so you can kind of just scroll through and see them all together. But we'll look at them department by department. Since it pulls from here, we need to make changes from here. So we can start with the non-salary departments just because it's first in the line there. And you all can go on through these expenditures. I will say for the non-salary department here, you can kind of see what all is included: Board of Assessments, constables, fire protection, cemetery board. Really, there were no changes to any of these until you get down towards the end. We have made some changes on this fiscal year. Let me freeze this so that you guys know what column we're looking at here. Okay. So you can see that we've made a few changes here. We've made a change to the special service grant groups. We've the debt service Southwest One needs to be put back to zero because it was zero originally. We changed it, and we have all the bonds in its own line. And then,
Taking a big risk not putting anything in there for beaver management. You're expecting these beavers to behave throughout the county.
okay, is that something you guys want to discuss?
No, he's
No.
being funny.
It looks like they've behaved up until this point. We've not spent any money on them so far.
We'll put a bounty on them if we have to.
Okay. So as we scroll on through, most of these changes that you see in the difference of budget is again just going back to the original budget amount, except for county insurance here. Our insurance, if you guys recall, a few meetings back, I had told you that our premiums had gone up beyond what we had budgeted, and so we had done I can't recall if we had done a budget amendment or appropriation transfer or a combination of both. But I did increase that to be more in line with what we spent this year. So that is an actual change, not just a reflection of changing in amendments. And then we'll have here whatever amount's going to be kept in our investments. And that's how we earmark those as investment dollars instead of spending those out. So we need that number will be updated. And then that's kind of all the changes for that non-salary department that we had made so far. Did anybody have any questions on that before I went to the next department? Okay, if you do, I can't hear you, so maybe shoot us an email if somebody's talking and we can't hear. Okay. All right, so going on to the judges department, we have, you'll notice as we start going to all the salary departments, you're going to notice a difference for everything that's a salary related line, and that is because of the retirement will show up, and then anything that's a statutory change, like the judge's salary, for example, and the commissioner's salary, that's handed down, of course. So there might be some changes there, and we've kind of tried to estimate what we think those are going to be. So for the judge's office here in the retirement, you'll see there's a spike, and that's because right now that increase that we were supposed to do, it's in the budget right now, since we have not gotten word that it is a definite freeze to the retirement numbers to last year. So until we hear that, we will just assume that we are going to be paying the increase. As far as cuts to this budget, you'll see that the judge executives, other employees, it's gone down, and that's because for this budgeted year, we moved the treasurer's secretary that used to be split between the two offices. We moved them out of the judge's office and into the treasurer's office. So you'll see this proportionate increase on the treasurer's side, so that position will no longer be reflected in the judge's budget. We cut out the uniform budgets. You'll kind of see that throughout the whole budget as we go. That's one of the cuts that we made were to uniforms, unless uniforms were strictly required. So we'll go on to the next one. The Office of the County Attorney. We've done a few cuts, and I'm trying to remember what all they are at this moment. I feel like, Jason, you had an intern or part-time, somebody that you usually hired, and you had...
I saw that wasn't on there. We talked about that when we met, and that's certainly something that I don't need. And just as a practical matter, I'm not sure that it's prudent, given their circumstances we're in under the governor's orders, to be having a young person coming in and out on a part-time basis anyway. So that's an easy one to cut.
Okay.
But I don't see it on here. That's about a $5,000 to $6,000 line item.
Yeah, those flow from a different document into this one, so I'll double check that it was removed. I think that I'm pretty certain that it was, and I think the reason that you don't see that 5,000 or 6,000 decrease specifically right here is because there were some other proportionate increase, just because when we went to update all of the salary schedules, Desiree and I, some of them look like they maybe in 2020 had not been completely updated, maybe just some things missed over. So as we go through here, there's going to be a couple of lines where there's an increase that outweighs a decrease because this just finally updated in the budget. So I do believe that your part-time person was removed from here. There was just some other increase that had not previously been shown in a budget, and we're having to catch that up now. So the county attorney also decreased supplies, uniforms, cut that position, and those were the cuts made there to his office. Going on to the clerk's office. We have an increase in retirement. Again, the retirement increases in here. And that's basically all of the changes that we had there. We have not made really any changes to the sheriff's budget. There are some differences in the column K there, but that's just from updating salaries. And then also, I have not updated an overtime. As of right now, when you're looking at this, it's sitting at 0 hours of overtime. So we have to put in an overtime estimate for all these to be up to date. And again, we haven't really we discussed with Eddie what he needed to do with his budget, and we haven't gotten to sit back down yet with him to talk about that.
Yeah, if I can say something about this, the court, if you look at, as far as the general funds and the 55%, how we were looking at it, the court has given a increase on the subsidy on the sheriff's department. I mean, you look at it, it's a fee office. The fees that are typically budgeted about 1.6 million, and annually it comes in just shy of 1.6. The court has approved to increase what was a $400,000 or $400,000 subsidy to $1.4 million subsidy. So this is within the general fund. You'll see this is a large increase on a subsidy, 1.4 million that is from the occupational tax. So you have to keep that in mind. I know Eddie and I we talked. We've already made some decisions to cancel some of the vehicles, but this is where a lot of monies the court has allocated with those OTAs. So I just point that out for when we get into further discussions within the budget. We're definitely going to have some discussions about this subsidy.
Okay, so for the coroner's office, we discussed with the coroner and have cut down on some parts and repairs. And then we've had some changes to, of course, his retirement. The other items were not very large. That there's not a lot of space in that budget to make a lot of changes anyway. Okay, the fiscal court budget. There's changes that are through the fiscal year. That's just as you tier up in the training fringe. Those are the changes in those items. Computer software, we went back through with Andy and it added up everything that would be in there. That does not reflect, I believe, any decision you guys made today about the power
D.
Power what?
D.
Power D that you guys talked today. So we'll need to update that to make sure that that's included in that budget. Make myself some notes here so I don't forget. Let's see. We have removed the travel expenses for Commissioner District 1 because historically he has not used that. You can let me know if that was not a good choice, Justin. Okay, and then, okay, so we've got a little change up on our leases here, just because of the way that, they're now done. They're all through enterprise, so that we've kind of rolled up some items into this line, here for all of our enterprise, agreements. This fiscal court's capital budgets, we just have it down to zero for now because it originally started as zero in the last budget. That will likely change as you guys make decisions on any capital projects. Even though it says a big difference here, that's more for amendments again. The 319 grant funds, we did choose to decrease that just because of how, the level of activity in that account now and how many people are taking advantage of that. We've made it more of a number close to what we think it's going to be based on what's been happening this fiscal year. We do have the bond debt service rough estimate there in this budget, that's going to be for the next year. And of course, there's a change for retirement, and you're going to see that in every tab, so I won't talk about it from here on out. All right, PVA, again, not a lot of changes here. We have a statutory contribution to them, and we have a salary portion that we pay for an employee, and I've already discussed in the receipts that we're going to receive some reimbursement from the PVA this coming year for that employee. Oh, the treasurer's office is here. Sorry, I had that set up to talk about if we needed to discuss it earlier. Let me unhide all this so you can see it better. It's going to look a lot messier. We went ahead and moved over Lindsay out of the judge's office. This has not been updated to reflect the change that you guys made today. So I'll update that. That'll have a savings around this line here of about 18 to 19. We went ahead and cut the travel expenses out completely, and that way, if we come out, if we hit this time next year and we're doing better than we think we're going to do on OTA, and I need training, I'll come ask you guys if I can go, and you can decide. We'll move money then. We cut out uniforms, and then we've got some changes to health insurance, retirement, and again, you'll see those changes. And kind of to hit on health insurance, as we were updating, I kind of already said that there were some salaries that were not, that looked like in the 1920 budget, that they had not been updated maybe that year, and so we're kind of having to catch up, and that's kind of the same for health insurance, and it's probably going to be that way every year, because as people come and go in the position and we refill, we're always going to have somebody come in at a different expense for health insurance, depending on if they're going to take health insurance, if they're going to take it just for themselves, if they're going to have a family, and I'm sure you guys realize that that'll kind of have a swing in health insurance. Okay, law library, we didn't change anything in this at all. The election budget, there was a change. After discussing with Tim the elections that are going to be in this coming fiscal year and what he thinks the needs are going to be, we kind of made some changes. We have not, again, like Judge said, if this turns into a mail-in vote, that could again change these numbers. So this is maybe a little more fluid as well, as we find out more what's going to happen this year. Economic development, there were not very many changes there. There's not much to change. It's really just salaries and a small amount of travel. Courthouse. We've made a few changes here. Other contracted services we've changed, and then we've changed our remodeling and improvements. We cut that way back and just kind of left a little cushion in case something came up that needed to be paid out of that portion. All right, other building maintenance. Let's see. We have a few areas here that we've kind of changed a little bit, just cuts where we can. We did an $8,000 cut to salaries, and I can't recall if that was a difference just because of a new position hiring in at a starting pay, replacing an old position that was higher than starting pay. This lease payment from the fire, this was originally budgeted at 14.4. We've now cut that down to 0, so we've cut about 14 there. The pest control, we've changed down to 0 because of, those are individually budgeted other places, I believe. And then, let's see, we've cut maintenance supplies a little there, and then tools and equipment. So that's about all for that one. The judicial building is really hard to make changes to, since there's so much that can go on there unexpectedly. And so, we did increase our janitorial services because we know what that's going to be based on what we've accepted this fiscal year. And the other items at this point are just cut back to what they were budgeted last year. This may be more changes to this too, as we see what's going to go on with the judicial center. Okay, on to GIS. Andy has agreed to make a few changes in his budget, things that maybe weren't needs, but were things that could be held off for another year or two. So he's cut desktop management here. We've cut out uniforms. We've cut out all travel. And then the vehicle lease payment was just moved from this line, this budget, to the overall budget, the line that has all of enterprise fleet on it. OEM, we don't have any changes there at this time. Of course, this will probably change as well, as we see what we need to do. The ambulance budget changed a little bit. They had that Lucas grant that was brought to the court, and so we have that going out. And of course, if that grant money comes in, it will be a receipt as well. And that's really all the change there to that fund. The animal shelter, since they have their donation account and it's pretty well funded at this time, we have made some cuts here and let them kind of rely back on that money a little bit this coming year, since we don't know what's going to happen with occupational tax, and then we can address that again the following year. Of how we want to change that. So there's just some cuts to some of the items that could be covered with that other fund, and you can kind of go through and see those. We also cut travel, as we have with many other budgets, and uniforms. The sanitation portion of our budget that we pay, this used to be Lindell, and of course you all had a meeting where we brought Lindell over to our county paid side. So he's now over here, this next tab, and that's why you'll see such a change here in these numbers. It's because it's now an extra person that's in that budget. And we cut travel there as well. All right, nuisance. Nuisance really had no changes. There's nothing there but a salary and $100 worth of supplies, so there's not really any changes there. The park budget. The park budget, we went through and did some cuts on some supplies and on, when you look at the supply line, usually these two last year were put together. And we've gone back to having them separated so that it's easier to track. But overall, there is still a cut there between 47 to now 35. We have a cut to the travel there as well. We have a cut to uniforms. We have a cut to improvement projects. We've cut mowing and improvements for the day parks. We've cut back on the special projects for the Christmas, so that's where they are doing repairs to the lights and things like that. So we've cut that back this year. Go a year without doing any major repairs. Try to. So those are all the budgets that are encompassed in the general fund. And so we've kind of gone through those already. So let me go back to the page that has all of the budgets together, and we'll scroll on past what we just discussed, which was the general fund, and we'll go to the road fund. It is next in line. Okay, this is where the road fund starts. We cut about $400,000 or $500,000 from this budget. It is heavily subsidized by the occupational tax. So we did a large cut there. Remember, about 30% this fiscal year of what we had budgeted to go out for occupational tax went out to the road fund. So they needed a proportional cut when we cut for this coming year. And as you go through, you can kind of see the places where that came from. Travel, equipment. We were able to cut a little on the salary side. I think that there was maybe a position that could be filled that they agreed not to fill for this coming year. We have some cuts to paving, and this puts this amount that we have, the 675, puts it back on track for a paving plan that had been in place. Scrolling on down, cuts to budgets for the building repair and expenses, road materials, the pipes, culvert, sewers. I believe that was a cut back to the original amount minus just a little bit, 10 grand there comparatively to how the amount. It wasn't a cut of 60. It was a cut back to the original plus a cut of 10,000.
Let me jump in here real quick.
Okay.
You'll see where we have $100,000 budgeted for salt. The current year that we're in right now, we actually did our bid openings, and 1,200 tons is what I believe we bid. We've got about 400, just shy of 500 tons that are still at the plant to pick up. Our facility only holds 2,000 tons, and it's maxed out. So the position that we're in right now with the current bid contract is that we are to pay for that salt as it's stored at the plant. You'll see we have historically bid, last year we bid 100,000. This winter, we really didn't have a bad winter, hardly used any salt. It's going to cost us, if we let that 500 tons sit on the site till December, about $25,000. One thing that the road department has had in years past and currently, when they leave Draftonville, the site where the salt bin is and the fueling site is, and an operator goes out to the south end of the county, one of the farthest ends of the county. They go out and they go to remove snow from the roads. When they get done with salt, or when they get done with, or they get down to the low fuel, they have to commute all the way back to the central part of the county. It takes about an hour to do a round trip to get back out to the south end of the county to continue applying salt and improving the roads. So in the discussion in years past, since I've been here, one of the things that we thought of to combat that issue to where we could save on fuel and time was to put a facility about 500 that would hold about 500 tons of salt in the south end of the county, so that when those work orders were given to the men to go out and prepare those roads, they would go and they would leave from Draftonville with their truck, with their salt load, full of gas. They go out to the south end. When they get empty, they don't have to come all the way back in the town. They can go right to that location in the south end, reduce the amount of time and fuel expenses and go back out and hit the roads. So where we're at now, I asked Wendy to get an estimate this current fiscal year with the budgeted dollars that we have, is to look at building that facility that would hold about 500 tons of salt this fiscal year. And then that way we could go and pick up the 500 tons that we have sitting in storage. We would reduce the cost to store it. We would have 2,500 tons going in the next winter, and we wouldn't have to budget $100,000 for salt. So that's a potential monies that we don't have to budget for next year. Those decisions, obviously, we're going to have to be discussing and making. As soon as she gets me that quote, I'll bring that back to the court, and we can discuss that in further detail. But there is a potential $100,000 that we could save in next year's budget.
Okay, finishing out the expenditures for the road fund, we cut the Benton Soil and Water Conservation District repair that we did last year. We don't have that carried over into this year. Some cuts to parts and repairs, some more equipment. There was amounts that came out of this line for truck payments, and that's gotten absorbed into the enterprise fleet line that we talked about earlier in the general fund, and so now there's only a grade all payment. Cuts to more equipment. We did zero out bridges and bridge repair and push that hopefully to next year when we are more confident in what our amounts are going to be, our receipts. So we did cut reserves for now for the funds as we decide where all we're going to cut places. This is the jail. This is the jail fund here. We don't really have much change there yet. Again, Judge had already said that we asked Roger to look through and tell us the best places that he feels he can sacrifice. And he's going to get back to us on that. There were a couple places that we preliminarily changed, but those are going to be dependent on needs of the jail. This is the grant fund. It's all zeroed out, just like the receipts in the grant fund are zeroed out. We can change that with any budget amendments as we go through the year if there's grant monies that need to go into there. Now we've gotten down to 911. Chris has agreed to cut one of the part-time positions. I believe is where that money came from. That out of his budget, so that will change the salaries there. And then this huge decrease you see here in grant equipment again. That's was just an amendment from last year. So. We don't have the out because we don't have the in. If that changes and he gets any of his grants, again, we'll do amendments, or if it happens before the reading of the budget, we'll fix it then. This is the OTA out. This has not really been updated. This, again, needs to be based on what we think the OTA in is going to be. So once we have a final decision on that, we'll have the outside of it as well. We've already talked about the animal shelter donation account. They're going to use some of that money to fund the leases out of their vehicles and then some of their operations for this year. So then the next two little sections.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you go back up to 911? I think
Sure.
it's important that the folks understand if you scroll down and you show keep scrolling down. Okay. So the CMRS monies that come in to fund 911, the landline monies, if I'm not mistaken, it's just under 300,000. Maybe it's 200. In between 250 to 225, if I'm not mistaken. But those CMRS monies are your landline monies, your volume share, and your pro rata share. If you look at the total subsidy to 911, we're budgeting $855,000 for next year. Expenses as of today at about $870,000. When we put that ordinance in place, that ordinance was to put a fair fee on the citizens in the community to fund 911. If the electric companies would have worked with us and not sued us, we would be looking at collecting a fee that would potentially eliminate this subsidy, and that's a huge subsidy to our budget, about 800. As of to date, $870,000. With a pandemic going in with OTA reductions or potential receipts being reduced going in the next year, $870,000 would have been huge to this budget as we moved forward. So I just want to point that out. The decisions that we were making with that ordinance and how it would impact our budget. So with us tied up in the lawsuit, we can't we have to continue to subsidize this budget, and I just want to point that out so folks understand that. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so we were heading on down to ABC here. It's a little long because we kind of have it divided out between the administrative side and then the policing side. So this top here is the administration side. Really not changes there other than retirement. Down to the policing side, there's not a lot of change here other than if we keep trying to fund 30% of the deputies' salaries out of this budget. Of course, with there was some pay increases throughout the year, and then there were some updates to the salary schedules. And then there's also an increase in retirement. So that will increase how much comes out of that line. We may not be able to cover 30%. We may have to change that percentage down if that's the way that you guys choose to do it. We went ahead and cut equipment, and I did that to balance out this increase of road deputies' salary. So if we change that might be subject to change. Again, it's just a rough budget. It's not. It's just the beginning. The last fund here is the building inspection fund, and we kind of hit on this already. This. It is not. It's the way as it stands now with the salaries that come out of that position, that fund. You can look and there's not a ton left in here. You see that travel has gone up, but that's due to how we pay the contracted individuals. Part of their contract is to pay travel, and so that's the reason you see that reflected there when we've cut other budgets, other departments' travel. But as it stands here, with these updates, you'll see the total building inspection fund expenditures 143.9, and we just talked about here what we estimate their receipts being. I have it at 143.9 because I balanced it out, but I balanced it out because I assume that we'll have cash left over of 43.8 to carry to cover the next year's expenditures. But I think that more realistically, we should say, oh, there's not going to be any money left there. So that budget is basically not funded by about 43 grand. And so again, you guys will want to discuss that. But that brings us to the end of the just preliminary changes that we have made. And Judge talked about this earlier. When you look at everything that we've changed so far, we have about $800,000 so far that we've cut. When you add all that together, we still need to find out from the sheriff's office and the jail changes that we can make there. So we need to cover the decrease that we are anticipating for occupational tax. We need to cover the retirement increase. If that holds, and we have to cover that. If we don't, then great. We have to cover changes that were made in wages through the year, whether that's from an increase, a salary increase to individuals, or if it's that it wasn't, the budget wasn't completely updated in the prior budget year, and so of course it looks like an increase when in reality it's more just catching up to what it should be. So we've got that increase, and then we also have the bond debt service that we need to cover. So this is just the beginning of the changes. We'll have to continue to find places to decrease the expenditure side of the budget.
All right.
And well, just one more thing as I'm thinking about it. I think I said this when we were talking about the sheriff's budget, and we just kind of skimmed it since he hadn't given us really any changes yet. As you're looking at this at home, I have nothing budgeted for overtime right now, so it looks a little wonky. So just keep that in mind. We'll need to decide what an appropriate amount to anticipate of overtime is and update that.
We've got, our next court meeting is April 21st. If you will, take this budget, go through it. The 21st, we can meet again. We'll have hopefully a little bit more information on receipts that come in on the 20th. But let's go ahead and plan for a budget workshop after fiscal court on the 21st. That way we can give everybody can come back to the table. Any ideas that you have, we can discuss. The goal is to get a balanced budget identified. So we can submit that, do a first reading on the 31st, and do get that sent up to DLG on the 31st. So why don't we, while we're already discussing this, I keep saying the 31st, it's the 30th. Why don't we look at having a special call meeting on the 30th, any particular time? If there's no particular time, we can do 9 a.m. on the 30th, and that'll be for a first reading. We'll send that out. That way you can get that sent off that day to DLG. So we'll do some reverse planning here. We've got the week of the 27th, and then the Tuesday before, on the 21st, we'll have another budget workshop, and we'll have some time in between the 30th and the 21st if we have to meet again. And this is just for the first reading, so we can get this balanced and sent to DLG. And just to give you a little bit more update on the salt building, it's about $50,000 is what was estimated just for the fabric. Installing concrete costs. We're going to try to find out between 36, 48 foot with 8-foot walls. So she's still working on the size of the building. If you noticed as you go through this budget, you'll see as far as what was budgeted, I think it was $100,000 that was budgeted this year. About $36,000 has already been expensed. Is that up to date? I didn't catch that date. Was that for?
Yeah, I updated everything last night to the end of.
So it's as of today, last night?
Let's see. As to the 31st. So
As of
anything
the
that they've spent the last 9 days is not on here, but.
Okay. But out of that line
It was at
item,
36.
It's at 36. So there are some dollars. I think she's got about 60,000 in there. So we could use some of the budgeted dollars for the salt to build that facility, and we can move that salt in, save our monies on the cost to store it, and then we can make a budget change for next year. So that's, but we can discuss that at the next court meeting. I'll have more numbers on that. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. If not, that is the budget. I felt it was more important to get it out to you, go through it line by line so you can see there's a lot of unknowns going in the next fiscal year. And this is a very a conservative budget as far as not knowing how this is going to impact us next year. I told all the department heads that we would prepare for the worst on the front end, and if it turns out to not be as bad as expected, then on the back end, any major projects we could look at then. But everyone understands these issues, all the department heads. Some don't, like it, but it is part of it. So that's where we're at. And if you got any questions, please reach out to me or Erica, and we'll look to meet for the next budget workshop on the 21st. All right. Appreciate y'all's time.